Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be diving into the core rules update that came out with Pariah Nexus, and we're probably also going to look at the Pariah Nexus Tournament Mission Pack. So some of the things that came out I wasn't completely aware of yesterday when I was going through the nerfs and so forth, so I have to say my feelings about the nerfs are that I'm a little bit salty. I do think the Eldar are still going to be fine in competitive play as far as the missions go and stuff like that. Took a look at those, and it seems like a lot of them are fine for the Eldar. You know, we did get nerfs to some of our more mobile units, but the deployment zones in these missions are closer together. So, that could either be a good thing or a bad thing, but I think, especially for the Eldar, I think it's actually a good thing for being able to get within the enemy's deployment zones, score objectives, and stuff like that. So, although I'm not happy with the nerfs, I think a lot of them were a little bit overreaching, and they didn't really come with any kind of good explanation that I could see. I still think the Eldar are going to be okay. Now, having said that, there's some really broken loopholes the GW has created for factions like Eldar and Dark Eldar, and I can definitely see those getting fixed within the next couple weeks, or maybe GW misses it altogether and it takes them, a little bit of time until some tournament data has been collected to find out what the Eldar and Dark Eldar have been up to. So I will go into that in a second. Now, for those of you guys who don't like cheese, quote unquote, or, kind of abusing the rules the GW gave us, obviously you guys don't have to play that way. You can play as intended for a lot of these things. It's no big deal, but expect to see them in competitive play if GW doesn't fix it quickly. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right into this. Now, the first thing about the core rules update is redeployments. So I'll go ahead and kind of dive into that for you guys. A lot of these things are going to be irrelevant for the Eldar for the most part, but we'll go over them anyway. And if they do have relevance, I'll let you guys know. So redeployments are rules that allow players to redeploy certain units after both armies are deployed. So for example, Prince Riel, his ability would be a redeployment. So basically what they say here, after the deploy and before the determine first turn step, before determining who has the first turn, when a player uses such a rule, they remove that unit or units from the battlefield and deploy them again using all the normal rules. So, for example, if all the models in these units have the Infiltrator's ability, that unit can set up using that ability. So that's pretty much what we already knew, right? They already kind of came out with that last time around, and we already knew that this was going to be the case this time. No changes there. It is before the first turn is determined, so they didn't buff that. Unit coherency. Same thing here. There's just a little caveat here that says, or cannot be set up following any restrictions stated by other rules while setting up using deep strike, etc. Right? So you have to stay within unit coherency, obviously. Persisting effects. Some rules apply an effect that lasts until a certain duration has passed. Such effects are known as persisting effects. If a persisting effect applies to a unit when it embarks on a transport, make a note of that, and if the unit disembarks for any reason, that effect continues to apply to that unit. So this is really cool with Eldar transports. So if you guys are wondering, for example, how do I get my, unit of, I guess, fire dragons or something like that, right? To be able to be, more durable against enemy fire if I move them forward. A Wraith Guard, for example, moving into a Wave Serpent. What you could do is you could, start the game with something like a character embarked on the Wave Serpent so that it doesn't get automatically destroyed. Then you can cast Fortune on that Wraith Guard unit, move them in the Wave Serpent, move the Wave Serpent up, and then if that Wave Serpent is destroyed for any reason, those Wraith Guard will have Fortune still. I don't know how, again, I don't know how applicable that actually is, but it's a neat little trick that you can do to ensure that your, Serpent Wraith Guard have Fortune or, something of that nature. Gaining command points. Outside of the 1 CP gained, you can only gain one other command point per battle round. Again, this is something we knew, but apparently some armies were, kind of abusing it a little bit and finding loopholes in the rules that allowed them to generate more maybe. I hadn't come across that, but I guess that was the case for them to need that. Battle shock. So essentially, units forced to take a battle shock test during the battle shock step in the command phase. they don't have to test twice, essentially. So if they have to take a battle shock once for any reason, they don't have to take it again for being under half strength. So no double battle shock during that step. Out of phase rules, basically what this means for you guys is just to give you a quick overview of this, because there's a lot of writing here. You can't use unit abilities when you use Overwatch. So for example, the Death Gesture is a perfect example of this. It has an ability that you activate during the shooting phase, but you can't use that if you Overwatch. So no sustained 3 if you choose to Overwatch with the Death Gesture. You're still going to get Dev Wounds, but you're not going to get any of those other abilities or Battle Shock or anything like that. So, you know, a couple people have mentioned to me in the past in the comment section, oh, hey, Overwatch with the Death Gesture is awesome. And I'm like, do I tell them? Do I tell this person, or do I just keep their sanity intact? And yeah, you can't do it now. Officially cannot do it. There's no kind of way around it. There's no like rules lawyering it. They have specifically stated you can't do it. Okay, moving on. Moving units. So each time you move a unit, other than remaining stationary, you can move it across the battlefield in any combination of straight lines and pivots. So this is the part that a lot of people were pissed off about before, where you'd have like units like winged, creatures or winged monstrous creatures. They were having to use the wing outline as part of the model's movement when they moved, which was actually making them a lot slower. This is now gone. Essentially, you can just, if they have an oval base, I think you still have to spend 2 inches to pivot, but that's it. Then you can kind of move wherever you want to, which is good. Now this will lead to a rules abuse that I will explain later on, but for now it's good. Straight lines, model moves in a straight line. Now, here we go, pivots. So some of you have mentioned that Wave Serpents and other, Grav tanks or whatever kind of vehicle or monster has a circle base, you have to subtract 2 inches from it. That's actually not the case. So what they've said here is that when models pivot, they can pivot however many times they want, unless otherwise stated. That's the first bullet point. The second bullet point is monsters and vehicle models. Now, here's the exclusion that makes this broken. Excluding models on round bases and aircraft models have a pivot value of 2 inches unless otherwise stated. So, Wave Serpents, Raiders, Venoms, Vipers, whatever kind of flying tanks you guys have out there, and that includes Tau vehicles as well, you do not have to pay this 2 inches to pivot your model. And this is really broken, because it essentially means that you can start a battle right up to the deployment zone horizontally. So, like if we take this example right here, you see this rhino. Let's assume it's a floating rhino, or a wave serpent or whatever, and we just flip it to its side. So we just flip it horizontally, and we put it right up on against the deployment zone. Well, when it's our turn, we can then pivot it right off the bat, and because it is longer than it is wide, we're going to get some extra inches out of that. So instead of moving that Wave Serpent, 14-inch movement, it's now going to be moving 16 inches. So basically all of our flying, Grav tanks have essentially gotten about a 2-inch, 1 to 2 inch extra movement in the beginning of the game. And depending on where you move, you could easily get another 2 inches when you pivot before you move. So this is a huge buff to Grav tanks. It's a huge buff to anything with a flying base, except I think aircraft models, it doesn't really matter because they can move they can move insane distances anyway. It's 20 plus. So it's not really a big deal for them. Now, some people have said that in the Pariah Mission Nexus pack, this is changed to fix this, but it's not. So we're going to go to that real quick because that's really one of the things I want to just get out of the way right off the bat. If we go to the Pariah Mission Nexus pack here, they have a pivot value chart, and some players have, thought that this actually helps, but it doesn't. So I'm going to show you why it doesn't help. Let's just scroll up. Okay, so everyone can see it. Models have a pivot value of 0 unless otherwise stated. This is the changed part that they have here. Models that are not on a round base, excluding aircraft models, have a pivot value of 2. Now, this applies to all models, but Grav tanks of all kinds, guess what they're on? Guys, they're on a round base. So that means that they still have a pivot value of 0. That's just as the rules are written. So I don't necessarily agree that this should be the case. I think this is a rules abuse. This is something GW obviously missed. Rules as intended would say your Wave Serpents still suffer this pivot of 2 inches. And, you know, some vehicles are going to be able to, even with the 2 inches, they're going to be able to squeeze, you know, a couple millimeters extra out of that, like Raiders. But that's as good as you can get, right? But the rules of written here just basically say that, yeah, models with circle bases still, you have that flying base under you, it still counts as a pivot value of 0. You can pivot for free. I think they will change this, and they will, you know, adapt this later on, but for now, that's what it is. So unfortunately, that's what we're stuck with for competitive play. A lot of the people I play with, they only play rules as written. So that's how it's going to be with them. Okay, so that's the pivot thing. And again, they give you some examples of this and stuff. You know, this thing, in the past, you'd have to spend all this distance for pivoting and stuff, which is insane. I always thought it was insane anyway. Overhanging models with a pivot value of 2. So this is, you know, an oval base. You can clearly see this. That means you're going to have to spend 2 inches to pivot. They even give you an example of pivoting, and now it's 4, right? Because I believe this model moves 12. So you move 6 inches straight, you pivot, that counts as 2. You can move 4 more inches. Okay. Shooting phase. Unless at least one model in a unit has an eligible target, for one or more of its ranged weapons, that model's unit cannot be selected to shoot, but it doesn't change the unit's eligibility to shoot. It just means that it can't be selected to shoot and nothing, and therefore won't qualify for other rule triggers, which makes sense, right? Now, this, I always felt like this was pretty obvious, because most of the rule triggers just basically say that you need to shoot. So I always thought that was an obvious thing, but they changed this. This does not affect fire and fade in any way, guys. You do not have to shoot to use fire and fade. I know it's fire and fade, but you don't actually have to shoot for it. This doesn't affect it. Mortal wounds, basically they just say that, you know, mortal wounds carry over like in the past. Devastating wounds count as mortal wounds now for the purposes of feel no pain and other abilities that target devastating or mortal wounds. Devastating wounds, as a result, has become worse game-wide. So if you're, you know, still thinking that that D cannon is a good option, not only did it get nerfed with indirect fire, which, you know, we did get into yesterday, but it's also going to be nerfed with devastating wounds, are just now worse. Speaking of indirect fire, we're going to mention it again because I think it might have been something I briefly went over yesterday but didn't really have super amount of context. And I mentioned that Dark Reapers got to ignore this. Well, I was wrong, because this doesn't count as a modifier. Reapers can only ignore negative modifiers. It's not a modifier, this is just a core rule. So unfortunately, the Tempest Launcher, not only did Reapers suffer a 5-point nerf for some odd reason, but they also got nerfed in this way as well. I assumed they got nerfed in points because they could ignore this, which is really powerful. So I was like, okay, yeah, 5 more points for something that ignores, you know, because it's still always going to hit on 3s. I guess not. It still hits on 4s. So that was the change I liked the least. And I think for a lot of players out there, there's just better options than Dark Reapers now, sadly, for the cost. There was no need to nerf them. And that's one of the main problems I had with the nerfs, is a lot of them seemed, you know, generally not needed or preemptive. And of course, preemptive nerfs are something that are, you know, quite honestly kind of dumb, because you don't know exactly how things are going to pan out yet. You could be the best player in the world, you could be a tournament player, this and that, and you can have predictions, but unless you can see it happen in tournaments and you see kind of how the game state evolves with your own 2 eyes, you're not a Farseer, you're not an Eldar, you know. You gotta wait until things happen before you actually make those nerfs, because, or else you're just killing a unit that could be great, right? Or could be really fun to use and maybe wasn't OP. That happened to Dark Reaper, so there we go. I also want to mention that I also think the Night Spinner and, of course, the D Cannon are completely obliterated by this. Night Spinner, not so much. it sucks, don't get me wrong. The Night Spinner's still going to be hitting on 4s anyway, though, so it's not that big of a deal. But especially for the D cannon, this is going to be pretty bad. And of course, the devastating wound durability, you know, kind of loss or nerf, kind of sucks as well. Okay, so that's indirect fire. This basically destroyed a lot of indirect fire builds. I think you're going to be seeing less indirect fire in the game as a result. I think as far as the Eldar go with indirect fire, we had probably one of the cheapest and for the cost, the best indirect fire platforms in the game with the Tempest launcher with Dark Reapers. Now it's really just, it's not that great. So anyway, moving on from that, sad stuff. Hazardous, they basically go over the Hazardous rules again, right? So we don't really have to go into this because guess what? The Eldar are an advanced species and we don't have to worry about these, kind of simple and, idiotic inventions that kill their own troops. So we don't have to worry about that stuff. But for those of you guys, fighting against that and want to know how to do it, basically when you roll a 1 for your Hazardous checks, if possible, select the model in the unit that has lost 1 or more wounds. So it goes to wounded models first. Otherwise, if possible, select 1 model in the unit, excluding character models equipped with a Hazardous weapon. And then finally, otherwise, if you don't have any models that fit that criteria, select 1 character model in the unit with the Hazardous weapon. So essentially what this means is that characters with Hazardous weapons in a unit with other Hazardous weapons don't get picked out and killed first. You have to do it to the bodyguard models, first and foremost. Okay, so they just say if using Hazardous when firing Overwatch, which that's a really dangerous proposition. I don't know why anybody would try to do that. Any mortal wounds inflicted by Hazardous tests are allocated after the charging unit has ended its charge move, which makes sense because what people were doing is saying, oh, I'm going to Hazardous you to kill a couple of models in the front rank so that you fail your charge. So you can't do that anymore. So 1 cheese is closed, and of course there's many other cheeses that GW opened. Extra attacks, where do you know what that does? Just you get extra attacks. Devastating wounds, I talked about that. Deep strike, if the unit has the deep strike ability and it arrives from strategic reserves, you can choose to use the strategic reserves ability or deep strike. Now, this is in reference to some of the new mission rules and stuff like that allow you to use strategic reserves. So just saying, you can choose which one you use. I mean, most of the time you're going to use deep strike, but some missions might restrict that or, whatever. So you can choose to use something else if you want. They talk about modifiers to toughness and leadership and wounds and all that stuff and what it can't be. So you can't modify over a certain amount or under a certain amount. So for leadership, it can't be a 9+ or worse or a 4+ or better. So even if you have ways of buffing it, it can't be more than that. And I think most of the models in the game don't have ways of doing that anyway, but there you go. Okay, leaders. So they made a thing on leaders, so I do want to read through this because it kind of has some relevance to every faction. So each time the last model in a bodyguard unit is destroyed, each character unit that is part of that attached unit becomes a separate unit with its original starting strength. If this happens as a result of an attack, they become separate units after the attacking unit has resolved all of its attacks. Each time the last model in a character unit that is attached to a bodyguard unit is destroyed and there is not another character unit attached, that attached unit's bodyguard becomes a separate unit with its original starting strength. Each time a unit that is part of an attack unit is destroyed, it does not have the keywords of any other units that make up the attached unit for the purposes of rules that would be triggered when that unit is destroyed. Basically what this is saying is if you destroy a bodyguard unit, all of the keywords that the bodyguard unit have cease to be basically, attached to the character that is left. The character becomes its own unit, and that bodyguard unit counts as destroyed. So it's a destroyed unit. That's it. So clarifications on that. People are always asking about that. Oh, do I have to kill the character and the whole unit to count as a destroyed unit? No, according to this, you only have to kill the bodyguard unit or the character to count it as a destroyed unit. So that will count for things like assassination. That will count for things like, I think it's called now Cull the Enemy or something like that. I can't exactly remember what the secondary is, but for destroying units, it will count for that. Okay. Command reroll. So I think they just kind of clarified a couple things here, right? Any phase just after you make an advance roll, charge roll, death escape test, or hazardous test, hit roll, wound roll, damage roll, or saving throw. All right, determine number of attacks, etc. So basically, just the effect is if you're using fast dice rolling, select one of those rolls or saving throws to reroll. So this means that if you roll them all at once, you don't have to worry about, rolling them one at a time to see if something fails and you have to re-roll it. You can roll it all at once and then pick one that fails and do. I like this way better. This is how I was doing it anyway. I know it might have been not exactly the way we were supposed to do it, but I just found it super tedious rolling dice one at a time. One of my Warhammer pet peeves, guys, is when people just slow roll like 30 dice one at a time. It just drives me crazy. I never liked that. So I always fast roll, and with command rerolls, I would basically do the same thing because it just drags on the game for no reason. So that's a good change. Insane Bravery, I mean, it's just before you take a battle shock test. I don't know how this affected anything. I don't see any changes here, but there you go. Let me know in the comments if there's an actual change to this that I'm missing. Grenades can't be used when you advanced, fell back, or have shot this turn, which makes sense. You choose one grenade model in the unit, and it has to be visible to your grenades model. So this was a problem that people were doing. They were basically, selecting a model to use grenades that was out of range, and then measuring it from something else, and that was causing, issues, basically making grenades too powerful. Tank shock is no longer the vehicle's strength, but the vehicle's toughness. So hey, we have a lot of toughness 9. That means we're just going to straight up be rolling 9 dice always now, which is a flat improvement to how tank shock worked before, which was the strength, which most of our Grav tanks were strength 6, and we got an additional 3 if our strength exceeded the opponent's. But in most cases, if we're tank shocking something big, it didn't. So now we're just getting 9 of them, which is awesome. So average of 3 mortal wounds there for tank shock. Rapid ingress seems the same, except now you can use the deep strike ability during it, which makes sense. Fire overwatch, again, seems exactly the same. Yeah, there's no plus here, and I think rapid ingress, there's no change here either. The only change is heroic intervention. It's now 1 CP, which is awesome. So there's a lot of units in our army. They can really, and guys, you haven't lived until you've heroically intervened with a fights first unit like the Solitaire, Jane Czar, Howling Banshees. It's really good. It's even good on things like Wraith Lords, I mean, I know people, some people were, skeptical of Wraith Lords and stuff like that and thinking, even at 140, I'd never take them. Well, I mean, they're kind of looking good now, guys. I hate to say it, but after the changes, they're looking like one of our better units, So you may argue with me about that, I don't know, but, they're much more comparable to Warwalkers now. First of all, the only difference between them and a Warwalker really is the ballistic skill. As far as the toughness goes, Wraith Lords hands down are tougher in a lot of different circumstances. There's really very few circumstances in which a Warwalker would be tougher, except against things that are like strength 20 plus, which don't really exist much in the game. Maybe like a strength 22. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think only like Titans are like strength 22. So, again, something that Wraith Lords are just as, if not tougher than Warwalkers in every way. And on top of that, Wraith Lords get some pretty decent melee profiles and flamers. So, I don't know, guys. It looks like Wraith Lords are, pretty comparable. Not that Warwalkers are bad. Again, I love Warwalkers. They're great. But Wraith Lords much more comparable now. Okay, Ruins. They added something here, right? Imperium Primarch, Belisarius Call, who is a character, and beasts. So Imperial Primarchs now count as infantry, basically, for Ruins. They can fight through Ruins, which is okay. Makes them a little bit better. Ruins Invisibility, this is basically the same thing. Aircraft models are the exception to this. They can draw visibility normally. They don't have to worry about Ruins or anything like that. Models that are within the terrain feature can be seen normally, and towering models that are within this terrain feature can also see out of it normally. Now, what normally means, though, guys, is if it's true line of sight blocking, That means if you're playing on WTC or terrain that the ruin is counted as all the windows being closed, then if your opponent can see you through a window, then they still can't see you. They either have to see you over the ruin or from the side of the ruin if you are inside of the ruin itself. But other than that, same rules apply. So a lot of people were confused on that, a little bit afraid maybe of what that meant. Maybe, if they can see me and if I'm passing. No, obscuring terrain still works and all that stuff. Okay. Your army must include at least one character model that is eligible to be your warlord. Okay, this is the battle line part. So this let's read this really quick because I missed this earlier, so this is going to be new for me too. Some rules grant the battle line keyword in 2 additional units in your army, like the Troop Master. Typically, if you select a particular detachment or if your warlord is a specific model, when mustering your army, treat such units as battle lines for the purposes of this step, even though the select warlord step comes after. Okay, so that's just good, right? That's just a clarification there, so that's good. Didn't affect anything. Let's look at some of the FAQs. Okay. General FAQ. If a model has a rule that allows it to shoot or fight after a certain condition is met, such as targeted by attack, how many times can it shoot or fight as a result of that rule within a phase? As many as the relevant condition is met unless otherwise stated. We don't have anything that does that, so whatever. When a rule allows a model to shoot or fight after being destroyed, but before removing from play, does that model's unit count as being selected to shoot or fight? No. As such, any rules that trigger do not apply. So this would be an example like Wraithguard. And by the way, the Wraithguard cheese is back. They changed it, and I'll show you how in just a second, because it's it's something that is a huge cheese. A lot of people don't like how it is, but GW basically clarified that you could do it in the core rules update right here and now. So that cheese I talked about the Wraithguard being able to basically shoot after a unit has finished making its attacks in combat, if you remove the units or models that are within engagement range, you can immediately shoot at the enemy and, kill them before they get to consolidate. So that is a thing, and that's backed up by the rules. I'll show you right now. Well, after we're done with this part. Okay. A lot of this doesn't really matter, I think. I mean, a lot of this is just self-explanatory stuff, right? Like, where on a model do I measure when determining if something is within range of an aura ability? You measure from the base, right? After all, sometimes is this a real question that people ask, or is this just something GW had to fill the form? I don't know. After all modifiers are applied, can a save characteristic ever be 1+ or better? No, obviously not. So that's actually a nerf to Terminators who are like, 2+ save in cover with Armor of Contempt. It's like, nope, can't be 1+ or better. You will still fail on a 1. Nice try though. Okay. So that one I think is, okay, so if there are rules that take effect with the same timing as when primary and secondary missions are checked for scoring, what happens first, what happens second? So the rules are, I think they're applied before. All rules take effect before any primary or secondary missions are checked for scoring VP. This is really good. Great. This, again, I think some people, I don't know how they get these frequently asked questions. I mean, are people really asking these things? Some of these? Each time a unit becomes battle shocked, do the effects of any previously used stratagems that are still affecting that unit stop applying? No, of course not, right? Okay, so all objective markers begin the battle in contested state. Is it possible for a player to control an objective marker before the end of the player's first command phase? No. So that means you can't get on an objective with a unit of rangers via infiltrate and count as controlling that objective until the end of the first player's command phase. All right, so there's a lot here. I think most of it is just negligent stuff that is not going to come up that much. But there is one thing, right, that we kind of already knew, but it's clarified here for you guys out there. If a rule adds the damage characteristic of an attack, example, the Melta ability, and another rule change changes the damage to 0, example, the Thousand Suns Destined by Fate stratagem or the ability of the Rogel Dorn, will the final damage characteristic be 0? No, the rules change states that damage characteristic 0 takes effect first, then other modifiers are applied, including the Melta ability. In the example, the attacking weapon had the Melta 2 ability. So basically what that means, guys, is if you have Fuegan and something has 6 wounds left and your opponent was just, saving that damage 0 for Fuegan so that they could survive, because Fuegan, of course, does 12 damage fully buffed, then they're still going to take 6 damage, which might still kill them. So really good news for Fuegan against those abilities, and Fuegan didn't get nerfed. He's still looking hot. So there you go. So Meltas are a little bit better against those types of things. Can't overwatch while you're engaged, even if you have big guns and never tire. That was obvious. Okay, and they talked about that already. You can't embark in a transport coming out of reserves. Makes sense. Positioning and movement. Can models overhang the battlefield edge? Yes, as long as the model's base or hull doesn't, and it's holding on the battlefield. So, like for example, flyers. Flyers come in, their bases just have to be on the battlefield because that's what they measure to and from, unless they're hovering. Okay, so I wanted to show you guys something because there's a bunch of FAQ stuff here, but a lot of it is just not really, it's not really necessary to look at. Let's see. Oh, here we go. This is one, though, that I think is going to be important. Can a unit in reserves be the target of a stratagem? Yes, if all the other requirements in the target section of that stratagem are met. So that's interesting. I don't know really what it would affect of ours, but, probably nothing, but there you go. Somebody can come up with something that would affect, units in reserve somehow. So this is cool right here. This just confirms you can fire and fade out of reserve. When a unit is set up on the battlefield from reserves, it is unable to move for the rest of the phase. Can such a unit make use of an ability in another phase to let them move? Yes. Which is great. Okay, let's read this. If a unit is reserve and some of the models that are in the unit have the deep strike, but not all of them, can they use deep strike? No. Sorry, Yvrain, you can't do that yet. I don't even know why she has deep strike, to be honest. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show you guys actually from the rules commentary. There's a couple things about being as close as possible and stuff like that. But we are going to look at big guns never tire out of shooting. We know that. Charging unit, we know that. Okay, the fast dice rolling thing that we talked about earlier. Fight on death when measuring to and from vehicles, excluding walker models that have a base, and models that do not have a base measure to and from the hull. We already knew that's how models move. Nothing new there. Okay, so this is what it is. Immediately, see just after. So right now they're making the distinction that the word immediately means the same thing as just after, and I believe after also means just after. So let's actually go back up because I think it's up here somewhere in the beginning. Hold on. Yes, right here, guys. After. See just after. And remember, the Wraithguard's ability is after. So basically before this, I guess, correction was made, before they kind of just jumbled all these words into one term, after actually did not take priority over just after. Just after was like a immediate situation, and after was just, well, after at a specific amount of time, right? So like, for example, the rest of the consolidation could happen before that because the player's priority came first, the charging player's priority. But they've changed it now to everything is just after. So let's go back down to that and let's read just after. So let's go ahead and go into this. Just after. If a rule is triggered just after something happened, which also refers to immediately and after, which means Wraithguard, it is resolved before anything else happens. For example, if a rule is triggered just after a unit selects targets for its attacks, that rule is resolved before those attacks are resolved. The triggering of such rules can therefore interrupt normal sequences, such as the attack sequence or the charge sequence. See eligible target no longer eligible. Okay. So what this means, and by the way, guys, I know it's in the core rules, but the fight phase is a sequence. It is a sequence of, this happens, then this happens, and this happens. The consolidation rule is part of the fight phase. It is a core rule. Now, normally, core rules would take precedent depending on the player's turn if your ability just said, after, for example. Right? Because that's not a priority. It's just, after this happens, the regular sequence would happen first. That would take the same priority as, it's they're the active player, so they would get to choose. And they would, of course, choose to consolidate so you can't shoot them. But just after means that it happens immediately. And that means you get to shoot before they consolidate. And that's it. Right? So I believe this works now. Because consolidation is part of a normal sequence. Right? Such as the attack sequence or charge sequence. They even go into it, right? And these are things that happen in the fight phase. Unit charges. Right? Then makes a pile-in move. An ability that says just after could therefore, if it was made just after unit charge, before they pile in, you could do something. So I believe I'm right on this. Again, I think it's going to be a whole, storm of stuff. It's going to be a whole, eldritch storm of, comments about how this is abusive and stuff like that to the game. That may be the case. I wouldn't use this against somebody I was just playing a friendly game with. I think it's probably a little bit of rules mongering a little bit. But GW just clarified that that's what it was. So in competitive play, it's fair game, as far as I'm concerned. Now, of course, a TO could look at this and have a totally different reaction to it and say, no, that's cheese. It's not allowed. Consolidation goes first because it's the active player's turn. But the way I see it, now that they've made that clarification, after, immediately, basically equals just after, which means it can interrupt normal sequences, means that, you can shoot before people consolidate under the right circumstances. Still, a very niche thing. You're probably not going to see much of this anyway. Okay, moving on from that. Again, I'm not even going to get into it with people. If you disagree with that, that's totally fine. Okay, have some measuring from destroyed models stuff. One-shot weapons are now unable to be used more than once in a game, even if a new unit has been added, which is great. Thank God for that. And repositioned units, rerolls. It is official, guys. A reroll is still considered to be a roll, and as such, any rules that can be triggered by a dice roll can also be triggered by a reroll. So hey guys, Strands of Fate, you can get it off of a reroll. No arguments anymore. It's rules as written, they put it right in there. And that's all there is to it. Okay, let's continue. Okay. Okay, now this is a big one, and it is a nerf to Wind Riders, so, hold on to your hats, guys. Although, I don't think it's as big for Wind Riders, because we have, other ways to get rerolls to hit than other factions, but basically rules with multiple conditions and effects. The ironic part is they ruled it the opposite way in the Necron FAQ, and now they're coming back and they're reeling it back so that you can't do it. So some rules have multiple conditions, with the second a more specific condition conferring an improved rule. Either instead of the first conditions rule or as well as it. For example, Locust Destroyers, hardwired for destruction ability, or the Orcs Bigger Shells for Bigger Get stratagem. Such rules require both the first condition and second condition to be satisfied for the improved rule to apply. And they give you the example of the Locust Destroyers, which is ironic because they gave the same example in the Necron one, but for the opposite. So basically, each condition was separate. So they've said now, nope, they're the same. There are multiple conditions. You have to satisfy the closest unit first, right? It has to be both the closest and it has to be a unit on an objective to get full rerolls to hit, which I think is stupid, but there you go. That's how it works now. Okay. And I don't know exactly where it is. Maybe I missed it somewhere. Maybe it's down here more. Table quarter, vehicle with the base, modifiers. Yeah, I missed it somewhere. But basically, there's another rule here that I didn't mention. So there were certain units that could shoot, hop back in an open top transport or one that had fire in deck, and then shoot again. That is no longer possible. So they got rid of that eliminator thing where eliminators were getting out of a transport, shooting, using their shoot move ability to move back in the transport and then shoot again with the transport. No longer possible. You can't do it. Weapons that have already shot do not count, so you can't fire twice with weapons like that anymore. It's now illegal to do that. And that's basically it for the rules, the core rules update. And, in general, I think there's some cheeses here that they've reactivated for the Eldar, like the Wraithguard cheese and the pivoting cheese. That used to be a cheese way back in 5th edition when you could get a free pivot and then move your full distance. And you could pivot as many times as you want. That is still in effect, and it's going to be very powerful until they either nerf it or fix it for the Eldar. That's just pure and simple. So what do I think about that? Well, I think transports like Falcons, you're going to see a lot more things like Fire Prisms, Falcons, Wave Serpents. Those things are going to be more powerful. Again, don't know if they're going to nerf it, so don't go out and buy, 3 Wave Serpents and 3 Falcons and just make a whole Mekdar list and just abuse the hell out of that rule, because it's looking like it's not intentional, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, Melta is a little bit better, more clarified, I should say. So maybe the Fire Dragon nerf that I was pissed off about yesterday, maybe not as bad as I once thought, because now Melta just goes over those abilities, which is good. Again, it's not like a big deal, but it's a very minor detail that and Fire Dragons are generally just better against, things that are going to be appearing in the meta, transports and stuff like that. As far as the Swooping Hawk nerf, I think, again, that was a heavy-handed nerf because they're a fast infantry unit. So I didn't agree with that. Didn't agree with the Yvrain nerf. I know everybody was saying, oh, they have to nerf Ynnari somehow. Well, I don't think so. And I actually think that despite the nerf to Yvrain, Ynnari actually got more powerful because now we can do 3 Archons. And by the way, if you guys have seen the Dark Eldar, what's happened to Archons, they basically get a 12-inch bubble now where any stratagem used by your opponent costs 1 additional CP. You just have to be within 12 inches. So Archons are really cheap. They can be attached to some pretty good units, like Cobalite Warriors and stuff like that. I mean, even in Ynnari lists, if you just run them solo, you could position them in spots in the battlefield where your opponent has to move to use a stratagem. So just let that sink in for just a second. 12-inch bubble. You could deep strike one in a Venom and put them on the outside of the Venom and then shoot an enemy Land Raider, and their armor of contempt is going to be 1 point higher. Of course, they could overwatch the Archon. But guys, that's also going to be a 2 command point endeavor. So Dark Eldar and Ynnari can also be very abused with the new rules. I think some of the nerfs that we saw, just flat out points nerfs and stuff, some of them were unfair. For competitive play, I don't think Ynnari and Eldar actually see. I think they're going to just get even better in Pariah Nexus because of these abuses. And until they fix those abuses, they're going to be pretty dominating. I mean, having the ability to have 3 Archons in a Ynnari list, because now remember, and this was brought up to me by somebody in my Discord, that I actually thought you needed to still be the Warlord to use it, but the whole ability is now replaced with that basically aura. So you don't have to worry about the Archon being the Warlord. the Archon just gets that ability. Dark Eldar are currently running, 2-3 Archons in their list. Ynnari can run 2-3 Archons in their list. Who needs Scourges when everything in your army is basically going to be, well, let me put it this way. Your opponent is going to be -1 CP to any stratagem they try to use on their tough units. And that applies to everything. That applies to every single stratagem in the game. That's a really powerful ability, and it's probably going to be nerfed or limited in some way to once per game. I can't see them keeping that. I mean, just imagine, let's say your opponent has 3 command points, and you deep strike an Archon right next to their Land Raider. Yeah, they can fry your Land Raider, but it's going to cost them 2 CP. And then, if they have to choose between Smoke and Armor of Contempt, they can only choose one of those now. So that alone, I think, is worth the Archon's life. And by the way, the Archon might not even die because of Shadowfield. So if you get lucky on that 2-up and you don't roll that dreaded 1, your Archon could survive that Overwatch still, which I think is just insane. So who needs an Archon attached to a unit when you could just run them solo and just have them just drop right next to enemy units that you're about to kill and say, hey, you have to pay an extra command point for that Armor of Contempt or for that Pop Smoke or whatever. It's really OP. And then if they don't overwatch you, whatever stratagems they try to use against you are going to also be at +1 CP. It seems, just even me saying it right now, it feels dirty. And I don't think I'll do it personally in casual games. But I could see it being really strong in a Ynnari list. Now, the next video I'm going to do like this is going to be building an Aeldari list and a Ynnari list for Pariah Nexus. I'm going to do it with you guys. I'm going to explain my rationale behind some of the choices I make for Pariah Nexus. I'm going to do a kind of a live version like this. I will later this week have some, more condensed videos for you guys that are going to be, in the standard format where I talk about all the changes and what basically is the big effects from them, and not just like this long drawn out video where I'm just talking and just, doing this kind of thing. So I hope you guys enjoy those videos. If you're into a more concise experience, I'll provide that later this week once I've had some time to really condense the material and think on it a little more. But I think just to let you guys know why I was so salty, and some of you guys that were commenting, there were some salty comments in the comment section of my last video, and I definitely agree with you guys. I'm salty too, but some context as to why I'm salty is because I think GW preemptively nerfed a lot of stuff they did not need to nerf, and at the same time they basically introduced really broken, abusable rules into the game that are making Eldar look like an absolute cheese army, basically. Dark Eldar and Eldar being the cheese of 40k. And I don't like that. I genuinely don't like it when you have to rely on cheeses to be able to win games. And, you don't necessarily have to win games, but, some of the most powerful stuff and powerful changes that have happened are affecting Eldar in a greater way than they are other factions at the moment. And I think just get rid of the cheeses and you can bring down the cost of the Eldar units that you nerfed. And I think things would be fine, and I wouldn't be upset about that. But we saw some kind of unfair nerfs to a lot of units. Now, we did see some buffs as well to Phoenix Swords and things like that. But typically speaking, most of the Phoenix Swords they buffed, Moggan Raw, Azurman. I don't think you'll see them in competitive play, right? And they didn't buff Baharoth. They didn't bring down his cost from 125, which I think he should be a little bit cheaper. Obviously, they didn't bring down Fuegan because he's the best Phoenix Sword out of the bunch. Really, the 2 Phoenix Swords that I think are got the best buff were Janzar and Hazardous. And that's it. As far as the Wraith Lord, obviously I think it's going to be better in Pariah Nexus, just in general, for reasons which I stated in my Wraith Lord video that I made, I think about a week and a half ago. So things aren't totally, looking bleak. I don't think our army is going to be like a 38% win rate or, 40% win rate, something ridiculous. But I do think when the abuses are fixed, we're probably going to slip a little bit. But that's, again, the mission rules and stuff like that do look good for us. So that is a positive. And a lot of other armies got severe nerfs as well. It's not just us complaining. It's a lot of other armies out there that are saying, why did this get nerfed when it's never been in competitive play before? Why did reinforcements get nerfed from Imperial Guard players? Why did this get nerfed and that get nerfed? Well, I mean, I think the bottom line is, and probably the reason why I was a little bit upset yesterday, is the GW changes in general seemed very sweeping, very punishing to almost everybody, and they seemed like they were trying to intentionally shift competitive players towards different builds on purpose to get them to basically spend more money. And, and again, for Eldar, it's looking like what's good right now. Wind Riders, Corsairs are looking really good. And again, it's like, no one was buying or using Corsairs really before, and now people are probably going to start using Corsairs, especially with Wave Serpents that can, get a free pivot and then scout move. Oh, and by the way, guys, I don't know if this, I believe it still works with the scout move because the scout move counts as a normal move. But if you're ever wondering how to really stick the knife into the cheese, with the scout move, what you can do is you can deploy your Wave Serpent horizontally, and then you can pivot it during the scout move, and then move it 7 inches from that location. And I believe that works under the core rules because, again, Wave Serpents have a circle base, and nothing in the, Pariah Nexus mission pack or whatever refutes that. So they get a free pivot, and then you get to, move your 7 inches. So you're basically Scout 9 now, by the way. So your Scout move has gotten improved. So again, I mean, just to me, and I know this is a little bit of a rant at this point, but just to me, it seems like GW is moving pretty much every faction into a different build to up sales. And it was so blatant. To a veteran player, it looked very blatant to me. It was like, what got nerfed? Well, all the units that were being, purchased and maybe had dropped off a little bit, right? So Swooping Hawks, Warp Spiders, everybody already has those, so those aren't selling. So they're like, let's just increase them, right? So a little bit of a downer. I think tomorrow when I do a video kind of recording a list, I'm going to try to build 2 lists, a Ynnari one and an Aeldari one, to show you guys, some of the tips you might want to go into Pariah Nexus with, some of the builds that might be really effective. We're going to, kind of go over that. I'm going to show you what I would build in Pariah Nexus to, be competitive, but at the same time not be like super spammy or cheesy or anything like I'm not going to be trying to abuse transport rules or anything like that. I'm not going to like try to abuse the Archon rules and stuff for Ynnari. I might have like 1 or 2 Archons, but I'm not going to like go for 3 Archons and just try to abuse that. You know what I mean? So anyway, though, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching once again. Again, later this week I will have some more, concise videos on the topic, and we'll talk about some other stuff as well. There are units that are looking a lot better now in general in the meta and in Eldar book, and there are units that are, kind of looking worse for wear, which we'll talk about and discuss. So thank you for joining me, everybody. Again, if you do want to help support the channel, or just want to say hi to me on our channel Discord, I have free trials on Patreon activated, which will grant you a permanent kind of place in our Discord. I don't, kick people out of the Discord for, not donating or whatever. It's totally free, and I would love to talk to you guys about, strategies, tactics, or whatever. We have a great community with us who really love to talk about Eldar strategy, tactics, and hobbying and stuff. So if you're a hobbyist or, a lore person, don't really care much of the game, come and join us. We have some, kind of like homebrew, craft world Eldar kind of detachments going on and stuff like that. And I'm trying to work on more myself, but probably going to have to do a little bit of an update with this last Pariah Nexus mission pack. Also, I'm an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page. So if you want to, get some discounted Eldar minis on Amazon and also want to help the channel out, or if you want to grab some Craft World Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page to help the channel out as well, and rep your local game store, the best faction of the game, I will leave those links in the description also. Alright everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thank you for watching once again, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.